There is a button in your cruise ship bathroom and you have probably pressed it without thinking twice. One push and everything disappears with a sound that is louder and more violent than any toilet you have used on land. A sharp, mechanical thump. A rush of air, and then silence. Most people assume that is just how ship toilets are built. A little different, a little dramatic. No big deal. It is a much bigger deal than it sounds. That flush did not use water pressure to push anything anywhere. It used air. Specifically, it used negative pressure, a vacuum maintained continuously throughout a pipe network that runs through every occupied deck of the ship, connecting your cabin to thousands of others. The moment you press that button, a discharge valve opened for a few seconds, and the pressure differential tore the waste away from the bowl at roughly 7 feet per second. The whole cycle lasted less time than it takes to wash your hands, but the journey it started takes much longer, and it goes somewhere almost no passenger ever thinks about. Here is the actual situation. A large cruise ship is not a floating hotel. It is a floating city. A city with no sewer connection, no municipal treatment plant, no infrastructure waiting on shore to handle what it produces. A ship like Symphony of the Seas carries over 9,000 people when passengers and crew are combined. Those 9,000 people generate approximately 210,000 gallons of black water, the waste from toilets, in a single week. They also generate around 1 million gallons of gray water, which is everything that goes down a sink, shower, laundry drain, or kitchen pipe. None of it can simply be set aside. None of it will be collected by someone else. Every drop of it has to be managed, treated, and disposed of by the ship itself, using systems built into the hull, while the ship is moving, often days from any port. Most people who think about this at all assume one of two things. Either the waste goes straight into the ocean, which sounds alarming, or it gets stored in tanks until the ship docks, which sounds manageable. Both assumptions are incomplete in ways that reveal how much more complicated the real system is. Start with the physics. A cruise ship is not a building. It is not a structure where gravity can do most of the plumbing work. Modern cruise ships can span 18 or more decks, stretch 300 meters or longer, and have cabins distributed across multiple zones in every direction. A pipe carrying waste cannot simply slope downward toward a central point. Some of it has to travel sideways. Some of it has to travel upward. Gravity alone cannot move waste reliably through a network like that, which means traditional plumbing, the kind in your house, the kind in a hotel, is not an option. The vacuum system exists not because it is elegant or innovative, but because the geometry of the ship makes it the only viable answer. Then there is water. Fresh water on a cruise ship is produced on board through desalination. Seawater is processed, membranes filter it, and drinkable water is made from scratch. It is a continuous, energy-intensive process, and the supply is finite in ways that a shoreside building's supply is not. A standard residential toilet uses between 6 and 9 liters of water per flush. A cruise ship vacuum toilet uses approximately 1 to 1.5 liters. The difference sounds modest until you multiply it by 6,000 passengers, several flushes per person per day, 7 days at sea. The vacuum toilet design is not a quirk. It is a direct consequence of the ship's water economy. Save enough per flush, across enough people, across enough days, and it changes how much desalination capacity the ship needs to carry. The toilet and the water production plant are part of the same equation. So the waste leaves the bowl fast, moves through the vacuum network, and arrives at holding and collection points distributed through the ship's lower decks. But it doesn't go directly into treatment. First, it goes through screening. This is not a step that gets discussed much, but it matters enormously. Vacuum systems are sensitive. They depend on consistent pipe diameter, consistent pressure, and the absence of anything that shouldn't be there. Wipes, paper towels, any non-soluble item that gets flushed goes into the same pipe as everything else. And when those items accumulate, they create blockages. Here is the part passengers rarely consider. The vacuum pipe network is zoned, but those zones are linked across cabin groups. A blocked section does not just affect one toilet. It can cascade through a connected group of cabins. Dozens of rooms with systems that back up because one person in one bathroom flushed something they shouldn't have. The coarse screening stage catches those objects before they reach the treatment equipment and damage it. The solids collected there are not recyclable. They are incinerated or offloaded at port. That is the first destination for some of what you flush. What passes through the screens enters the treatment plant. On modern ships equipped with advanced wastewater treatment systems, the core of that plant is something called a membrane bioreactor, or MBR. The name sounds technical, but the logic inside it is biological. Black water flows into an aeration chamber where aerobic bacteria, living organisms carefully maintained, fed oxygen continuously, essentially, consume the organic material in the waste. They break it down the same way bacteria break it down in land-based municipal sewage plants through the same biochemical processes. The difference is that on a ship, those bacteria have to be kept alive and healthy inside a machine that is rocking, vibrating, and operating in a marine environment around the clock. This is where a detail most passengers would never connect suddenly makes complete sense. Cruise ships have approved cleaning chemical lists. There are specific products that can be used on ship toilets and specific products that cannot. Most people who encounter this rule assume it is about protecting the pipes or meeting some environmental regulation. That is not the primary reason. The reason is that the wrong chemical, flushed into the system in sufficient quantities, will kill or disrupt the bacterial colony in the bioreactor. The entire biological treatment process depends on those organisms staying alive and active. The cleaning chemical rule is not bureaucratic hygiene management. It is protecting the treatment plant from the passengers above it. After the bioreactor, the partially treated water moves through membrane filtration, which captures remaining solids that the biological process did not fully break down. Then, flocculation, a chemical process that causes suspended particles to bind together and settle out. Then, ultraviolet disinfection, which destroys remaining pathogens by exposing the water to UV light. The output of that full sequence is water that the Washington State Department of Ecology, in documented testing, found to exceed the effluent quality of most land-based coastal sewage treatment facilities. It is not drinkable water, but it is clean water in a meaningful, measurable sense. Clean enough for non-potable reuse on board, clean enough to be held and discharged at sea under regulated conditions. The solid material separated out during treatment, the sludge, follows a different path. It is either incinerated on board in dedicated marine incinerators, which reduces it to a small volume of ash that is stored until port, or it is offloaded at port facilities for processing onshore. Nothing in the system simply disappears. The ship accounts for everything it produces, even if that accounting happens in ways invisible to everyone walking the decks above. Now comes the part that rewrites the assumption. Most people who have thought at all about cruise ship pollution have imagined toilet waste as the main concern. The scandalous part, the thing regulators should be watching most closely. That instinct is wrong. Black water from toilets is actually the most tightly controlled stream in the system. On modern ships with AWTS, it goes through a full multi-stage biological and chemical treatment process before discharge. It is logged, monitored, and subject to strict international regulations under MARPOL Annex 4, which sets minimum discharge distances from shore and treatment standards for any vessel carrying 15 or more people. Gray water is a different story. Everything from your shower, your sink, the ship's laundry facilities, the galley drains, accounts for the majority of wastewater volume on a cruise ship by a significant margin. And under baseline MARPOL rules, gray water is far less regulated than black water. Depending on the region of operation, it can be discharged with minimal treatment, or in some corridors, with almost none. Gray water contains detergents, cleaning chemicals, grease, food particles, and microplastics. It is not sewage in the traditional sense, but it is not neutral either. The thing passengers worry about is the thing the system handles best. The thing no one thinks about is the thing the regulations still haven't fully closed. The regulatory picture also explains something about the technology. Not all cruise ships operate at the same environmental standard. The ships with the most advanced wastewater treatment systems tend to be the ones sailing the strictest regulatory routes, not necessarily the newest ships or the largest fleets. Alaska established its own rules under Title 14 for large cruise ships operating in Alaskan waters, requiring fecal coliform levels as low as 40 colonies per 100 milliliters, a standard stricter than many U.S. land-based plants. The Baltic Sea became, under MARPOL Annex 4, the world's first designated special area for sewage, requiring passenger ships to meet additional nitrogen and phosphorus removal standards, phased in between 2019 and 2023. Since that designation, the number of ships meeting Baltic Special Area standards has grown by 175%. The technology spread because the regulatory geography tightened, not because the industry independently chose a higher standard. The route shaped the machine. That is the structural logic underneath the visible cleanliness of the ship. It is not virtue driving the investment. It is compliance pressure in specific corridors, combined with the operational reality that ships sailing multiple routes find it simpler to build one system capable of meeting the strictest standard everywhere than to reconfigure for each jurisdiction. 84% of global cruise passenger capacity now sails on ships with AWTS systems. That number continues to rise, driven partly by CLIA, the Cruise Lines International Association, whose membership requires zero discharge of untreated sewage as a baseline condition. The remainder of the global fleet, the older ships on less scrutinized routes, operates under legacy standards. The patchwork is real. The ocean is not uniformly protected, and the degree of protection a given stretch of water receives often depends less on its ecological sensitivity and more on whether a regional government has attached enforceable standards to it. Below the waterline, the treatment plant runs continuously. Not when passengers are awake, not during peak hours, not on a schedule anyone announces. Continuously. Vacuum pumps cycle. Bacteria consume. Membranes filter. UV lamps run. Engineers monitor the system's pressure readings, bacterial health markers, effluent quality outputs, and the ship's GPS position relative to discharge permitted zones. When the ship is close to shore, the treated effluent is held. When the ship moves beyond the regulatory threshold, 3 nautical miles for treated discharge under MARPOL, the system calculates and the release begins. None of the passengers booking shore excursions, finishing dinner, or falling asleep in their cabins are aware that this decision is being made one deck below them. This is what the cruise experience actually is. Not the pools and the buffets and the ports of call. Those are the visible layer, the surface that was designed to be looked at. The real structure of the experience is infrastructure. A desalination plant making the water you drink and shower with. A vacuum network running under every deck. A biological treatment plant maintaining a colony of live organisms that process your waste, an incineration system handling what cannot be discharged, a crew of engineers managing the outputs continuously, in compliance with regulations drawn up by an international maritime organization and modified by a patchwork of national governments with different priorities and different enforcement capacities. You pressed a button in a bathroom and moved on. The ship did not move on. It activated a vacuum, pulled the waste through a ship-spanning pipe network, screened out what could not be treated, ran the rest through bacterial digestion, filtered it, disinfected it with UV light, held it in storage tanks, checked the GPS position, compared it against regulatory zone tables, and eventually returned treated water to the ocean. The whole sequence, from your flush to final discharge, involves more engineered infrastructure than most small cities apply to the same problem on land. A cruise ship toilet is not a toilet. It is the visible entry point into one of the most complex waste management systems most people will ever interact with, running silently one deck below their feet, unmaintained by any city, unconnected to any shore infrastructure built entirely because the ocean left no simpler option, and the ship had no choice but to become its own city, with all the invisible machinery that requires.